What's up with the secret? Over and over, Jesus, he reveals something, he does something wonderful, he works a miracle, heals someone, casts out a demon, but then if there's anybody who knows who he is, the Christ, he tells them, don't tell anyone. And over, he says, don't tell anybody about what happened or about who I am, and then everybody tells. And then Jesus says, really, I'm serious, don't tell anybody, and then they tell people more. Okay? And this is like the one place. Jesus is all powerful. He commands demons and they just do what he says, but he tells people, don't reveal this, and nobody obeys him, you know? This isn't just a random thing that Jesus does this, and there actually is a turning point in the gospel today. Jesus is holding on to the secret on purpose. He's doing something, okay? So here's what happens, okay? In the Gospel of Mark, we're looking at the whole gospel. It breaks into two parts, and today is the seam, the middle point. In part one, Jesus breaks onto the scene out of nowhere, unexpected, begins preaching the gospel of repentance, the gospel of the kingdom. He's working miracles. People love listening to him. More and more people are following him. He's walking on water. Anybody that comes up to challenge him, he slam dunks them over and over until they have nothing left to say. He is like ascending and growing and getting bigger. He's unstoppable. He goes where he wants. Everybody is following him. Like, this is Jesus in this first part. And through all of this time, he says, whenever it comes out that he's the Christ, who he actually is, he says, keep it a secret. Don't tell anybody. He wants people to hear him. He wants people to follow him. But he doesn't yet want them to know who he is. And then, part two, okay, it starts today in the gospel in chapter 8. This is the change. This is the turning point, because this is the last time in the gospel that Jesus says, do not tell anybody who I am. After this, he doesn't say it anymore. What changed? How come after today, it's no longer a secret? Here's the hinge, okay? It's this thing right in the center of the gospel from today. Jesus asks his disciples, who do you say that I am? And St. Peter says, you are the Christ. And Jesus responds, essentially, yes, I am. Let me tell you what that means. I will be betrayed and rejected and tortured and suffer and will die and will rise on the third day. This is the change. This is the first time. Everybody's had inclinations like, this man is from God. He could be the anointed one. He is powerful. He brings good news. He's unstoppable. But this is the first time that he reveals his betrayal and suffering and death and resurrection. After this, like this is the rest of the Gospel of Mark. Part one was his like ascending. After this, at this peak, Jesus makes his way to Jerusalem, where he will put himself into the hands of his enemies and where he will suffer and die. On the way, he says two more times, he reinforces this, I am going to be rejected and betrayed and will suffer and die and rise again on the third day. And every time he says it, everybody just kind of looks past it, or at one point it says they didn't understand, but they were afraid to ask him. But as he goes to Jerusalem in the second part, it is no more a secret, okay? When he gets to Jerusalem and everybody is waving palms at this triumphal entry, they're hailing him as the king, Hosanna to the Son of David. He doesn't say, no, let's keep it quiet, let's sneak in. He receives this triumphal entry and he walks in as the conqueror. And then when he's on trial with the high priest asks him point blank, are you the Christ? And he says, yes, I am. Why is this the moment of change? How come it was a secret up till now and it's no longer a secret after this? Here's the deal. It's because a partial Jesus will mess you up. Yes, in this whole first part of the Gospel of Mark, Jesus brings good news and healings, and he says, love one another, and he's working miracles. There's nothing not to love, you know? And to have a full understanding of Jesus, and we have to know that this same one will be betrayed and will suffer and die. It's no longer a secret after this because Jesus has finally given us the essential piece of who he is. In some ways he says, don't tell anybody who I am until I give you the whole story, until you know not only am I the Christ, but I am the Christ who will suffer and die and rise. So as soon as Jesus has said this, at this turning point, like 10 seconds after he has said what we're looking at, Peter rebukes him, takes him aside and he rebukes him. He says, "What are you talking about? Don't say those things." This is the first revelation of the whole of who Jesus is, and immediately after, who Jesus is already twisted and falsified. Peter rejects who Jesus says he is, and he corrects him to be who he thinks he should be. And this is amazing because the Christ that suffers and dies, this is the Christ who loves all the way to the end. It's not just about pain and suffering. It's about love through pain and through death. When Peter rejects the cross, he pushes God to love us less than he actually does. In some way, this is not only a rejection of who Jesus is, but the love that God has for us. He says, "Love us in a less intense way. Love us without pouring out your blood." And when Jesus rebukes Peter, he says, "Get behind me, Satan." This is pretty intense. But this is because this is the tactic of Satan, to get us to follow a partial Christ, a counterfeit Jesus. A Jesus with the things that we like, so that we believe that we're on the road to salvation when we've missed the whole Jesus all along. Because Jesus without the cross does not save. So this is why I'm talking about this. We can be like Peter. We're all here because we have answered the one most important, the one infinitely important question: who do you say Jesus is? Yes, we say Jesus is the Christ. But the Christ that we follow is shown in our lives. And we can cling to a false Christ if we resist Jesus' suffering and death, like St. Peter did. So here's a little examination. What is our response when following the Lord will cost us something or cost us greatly? What is our response when it's hard, or when we have to change, or we have to give something that we really want to keep? Do we shrug it off, or do we see it as a call to love? It's easy to follow a partial Christ. There are many false Christs. They look a lot like Jesus. They're full of the things that we like, and they avoid the things that we don't. Do we follow Jesus, or do we follow who we want Jesus to be? This is how you can tell the authentic Jesus. And this is why Jesus keeps the secret all along. Because Jesus that is just good and powerful is not enough. The authentic Jesus, the Jesus who comes to save the world, he has holes in his hands and his feet and his side because he has suffered and died for love of us. This is the only Jesus that can save. All the other false Jesuses, they're living, they're attractive, but they have no holes in their hands and feet because they have not suffered and died for love of us. Their love has been too small, and they have called us to too little. What does it take? What does it look like to follow the real Jesus who suffers and dies and rises, the Jesus who saves? Because Jesus knows our trouble, because he wants us to follow, to have this reliable way to follow his authentic self. He tells us in the gospel today, he says, "Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." And again, this is not just suffering for its own sake. It isn't like you have to go through pain to follow Jesus. The point is that this is the kind of love, the distinct kind of love that Jesus gives to us and that we are called to give to him in return. The love of the cross, where we lay down our lives, we pour ourselves out, we go through suffering for love. Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And St. Peter looks really bad in this story. But the end of St. Peter's story is redemption, because he fails after this. He betrays the Lord at the crucifixion, and he leaves him to die. He's too afraid to stick around. When Jesus rises again and meets St. Peter, he gives him this chance of forgiveness, and he pours the Holy Spirit on him. St. Peter becomes bold and courageous. He doesn't let the Lord down again. But at the end of St. Peter's life, this is how it comes full circle. At the end of St. Peter's life, he was crucified for love of Jesus. And I think, I've never thought about this before, but I think as St. Peter was on the cross, having the nails pounded into his hands and feet, he probably thought about this today. When Jesus said, "I am the Christ, and because I love you, I will suffer and die on the cross." And St. Peter said, "No, please no." And Jesus rebuked him and said, "If you are going to follow me, you have to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me." I imagine it was a great strengthening consolation for St. Peter on the cross, to see how the Lord prepared him and how, by the mercy of God, how Jesus gave him what he needed to follow him, the real Jesus, the Jesus who saves, and not to be led astray by fear or comfort or anything like that. So this is the point that Jesus is focused on. This is what the whole Gospel of Mark points to. The whole first part, Jesus ascending and growing in popularity and power, all these things, and then his descent to Jerusalem where he puts himself in the hands of his enemies and suffers and dies and rises. Like at the peak of the Gospel of Mark is the reading that we had for today, the turning point, which is when Jesus says, "This is who I am the suffering Christ. I am the Christ of the greatest love." What saves the world is not power, not removal of suffering, not the avoidance of death. The world is saved by Jesus crucified, who accepts suffering and death for love of the Father and for love of us. There is no Christ, there is no salvation without the cross. So we return again to the question Jesus asked, the infinitely important question, the most important question of our lives. Who do you say that Jesus is? We say the Christ. And then we got to look humbly and ready to change. Who does your life say that Jesus is?